Hey guys, quick intro for the upcoming video. So today you're going to see a runtime guide of GitHub Actions for non-developers or business folks or other QA folks who have been given access to a runtime GitHub Actions environment, are being told to run the automation, look at the reports. Absolutely the top takeaway from this video is going to be that GitHub Actions on occasion will lag when it comes to the kickoff and canceling, and the most important piece is do not keep clicking go, keep restarting it. So without that, enjoy the video and don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. Hey guys, welcome to a video on GitHub Actions and some practical notes. For those of you guys that don't know me, my name's Ben. I run Loop Software and Testing Services. We provide GitHub Actions is one of our preferred methods for running it. So quickly getting into it, for those of you that don't know, GitHub Actions is very similar to AWS Azure. It basically provides a cloud-based environment for running Playwright and other test automation frameworks. There's a lot of other development that goes on into it. Specifically, when we run it, it's because we're running our test automation. We try to give access to clients and to be able to run it in their own environments. So GitHub Actions offers Linux machines, Mac OS, and Windows, all different configurations. It's basically run through YAML files, very similar to some other components. What I really want to cover specifically, though, for this video is if you are not a developer, you're in the business side, you're in the QA side, manual maybe, or you're just somebody who needs to run the automation, how do you run it and where? So if we've added you to a project, in general, you're going to be added to a GitHub project. It's going to look and feel very similar to this. When we add you, oftentimes it's going to be to a private repository. There's going to be a couple notes, though, about public versus private repositories. So the first thing to note is that public versus private repositories. Private paid repositories when it comes to GitHub Actions. There's a cap on the number of minutes that you can provide. Public, though, there's no cap. You can basically run it forever. If we look, you can see that GitHub Actions basically charges by the minute. It's actually really affordable overall. One of the things that we'll see is that it's like 0.08 cents per minute. So you have Linux, you have the power of the Linux machine, and then you have the cost per minute. Now, once again, if we were running this in a public repository, meaning anybody can get in and run this, there is no cost, which is awesome. So it's unbelievably cool. When it's private, though, you can see, you have 2,000 minutes for Pro, you have 3,000 minutes for Enterprise, you have 50,000 minutes. That might seem like a lot to somebody who's not necessarily super used to this, but when it comes to a full-scale regression suite, even though that regression suite's only going to run in a total duration of 9 to 10 minutes, if you're firing 50, 60 machines at once, your build time might be upwards of almost 1,000 minutes, right? Once again, that's only $8 according to the math, but if you start to do that 20 times a day, it can add up. So the first thing that I want to quickly touch on is if you've been added to this repository, please know, is this a public repository or a private repository? Most of the time, if you've been added to a GitHub Actions repository and you're being told to run it, you will see a list of different GitHub Actions on the left side here. Here we have one called demo, YAML file right here. And there's oftentimes going to be an input field that you can choose from in order to run. Now, a couple notes about this. One is oftentimes you're going to have your different environments, and then you might be required to put in a description. If I put in, this is a run command for the video, and I click run. This is the single biggest takeaway from this call. GitHub Actions delays by sometimes a couple seconds, sometimes a little bit longer, the run. See how it took that about 4 or 5 seconds between the time that I clicked run and it started running. That can sometimes last up to 10 to 15 seconds. The worst thing that you can do is queue a bunch of runs because you think that one run happens. I have never seen GitHub Actions not effectively run after it's been told to run. It's just a question of, is it going to take 2 or 3 seconds, or is it going to take 9 to 10 seconds? I have some questions into GitHub on why this is the case, but really the biggest takeaway that I could ask for in this video is do not just spam run over and over again. It will try to run all of those. And more importantly, GitHub Actions, when it is queued a lot, has a hard time canceling. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about next is canceling. But you can see I kicked off a run. It's now spinning up all these different Linux machines. What you were looking at is essentially the GitHub Actions flow. We have the installation process, then the set storage. This is not a video on GitHub Actions. Do a different video on that and how to set up the YAML. Instead, this is just quickly talking about where and how to use GitHub Actions. So while this finishes, what I will quickly talk about is where and how you can cancel runs. So at any point, you can try to cancel the run at this level by hitting cancel run. Next, you can go into the video, or not into the video, excuse me, into the flow, and you can try to cancel it from there. Alternatively, you can go into any one of the actual machines themselves, and you can cancel the machine itself. The challenge with GitHub Actions, the only real headache I have with GitHub Actions is that sometimes the canceling is delayed. So if you were to queue up 8 to 9 of these runs by accident, and you start trying to cancel them, they will keep running, sometimes for 10, 15 minutes before they start to get canceled out. Once again, I have a sort of message into GitHub Actions trying to understand why that is the case. They said that it's something that on occasion gets reported but should not be a consistent problem. Please, though, once again, for my takeaway of this video, do not go in, kick off a bunch of builds, and then have to be in a position where you're trying to cancel those builds. You will be getting charged very little per minute, but you'll still be getting charged your 0.008 cents per build minute and working through it. Now, okay, so you've got in, you've run, you can see an overall pretty successful run, and we're going to see now if we were to want to go in and actually look at the report, what we would simply do is go to this report that in theory we should bookmark, and you would see on loop-sts.github.playwright.io, you have your report for your test cases. Now, this URL is only ever going to show you the most recent run. Additionally, we can customize this URL, so you as a user have the ability to go in and see a custom URL. For now, this totally is just more than fine doing it as a public-facing URL. The other thing to note is in a public repository, this will always be a public URL. In enterprise GitHub, which is what we tend to run, when it's a private repository, you can make this a private URL. But you don't even have to go to GitHub Actions to see this, right? We could go directly to this URL. Somebody else might have kicked it off, and then we can go and we can see exactly what happened. We can see all the individual test cases, the steps, etc. And so what happens is when you're done running it, it always publishes to that URL, and you can see it actually has a nice little prompt right there for the URL. Additionally, though, it's always going to spit out artifacts from each job. So if for some reason you don't want to have to go to the URL itself, you can look at those individual artifacts. But once again, where and how to download those artifacts, I'll make a sort of a separate video from it. The only other thing that I will note, though, is like we just talked about, it's only ever going to show the most recent report. If you are looking for an older report, all you have to do is you go into the job and you download demo merged in this case. Now, each project is going to have its own merged report name. In this case, we call it demo merged. Each one of these reports will have demo merged, and they will all have a index.html file that you can actually open and see the report. The only limitation to this is going to be when it comes to the trace files. If you download demo merge, which we can actually just go ahead and download for the sake of this, when you try to open the index HTML file, it's not going to necessarily like the trace files. If you are trying to think of solutions on how to run the trace files, there are a couple. We actually are going to probably produce another video on trace files. What I would recommend, though, is for the most part, just use the URL. Use loop. In this case, loop-sds.github.io. It's great. It powers the trace files directly from GitHub, which is fantastic because it just makes it so much easier to actually diagnose things, debug things. So to quickly recap this video, because I know I talk fast in a lot of these videos and I'm trying to slow down a little bit. GitHub Actions is a tool to run the automation. It's the same as running the automation in AWS. It's the same as running the automation in Azure. It is essentially pulling up virtual machines and it is deploying the automation directly into them. It is then spitting out reports. If it is a public repository, there is no limit on minutes. Go crazy. Use as many as you want. If it's a private repository, absolutely be aware of the number of minutes that you have to run, particularly if you're using somebody else's. Run, be patient for 5-10 seconds, let it kick off. And then when you are trying to cancel it, be aware that sometimes canceling it can take some time. It will always cancel, it just can take some time. And it's rather frustrating because you might be hitting cancel and you're like, oh gosh, there's minutes. GitHub is pretty responsive. If you say you were trying to cancel a build, particularly if you have video evidence of it, and you say, hey, can I please have my money back? As far as I've seen, when you can talk to somebody, they're always pretty good about recognizing that it wasn't intentional. And then last but not least, for us at least, we kick our reports to GitHub pages, and those pages, are published. So if you have any questions about GitHub Actions, specifically how we run them, absolutely don't hesitate to reach out. But that's a quick video on GitHub Action. Talk soon.